Hi, hello, what is up? Welcome to the Still Finding Yellow podcast, a place where we unpack. Welcome to the Still Finding Yellow podcast, a place where we unpack. Welcome to the Still Finding Yellow podcast, where we unpack the places in life and in our walk with God where hope and brokenness can coexist. If I have never had the honor and pleasure of meeting you, my name is My Unique, but you may know me as Instagram for Believers, and I am so excited to be back. It has been a season. As you guys know, I am so on and off with a lot of things, but I actually took the last, I would say, year off of everything ministry related just because I realized I was in such a place of trying to force things to happen that weren't meant to happen. And I think God slowed me down in so many different ways and just allowed me to spend time with Him, recalibrate, and prepare me for the season that is to come, which is the season that I'm stepping into now. And so I did rebrand my podcast while I was away very quietly. And so if you are watching on YouTube, you may have noticed that the name has changed, and it's something that I found that was more me, and I'll explain that in a different podcast. But for today's episode, I wanted to kind of unpack what it looks like dealing with church hurt and what it looks like stepping back into the world of being a part of a local church. And if you don't already know my story, about a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, it's not even a half, maybe about a year ago, I have actually shared this on my platform, Instagram for Believers, a lot of times, where about a year ago, I was let go or fired, whatever you want to call it, from the church that I had been a part of for about 10 years. And so I spent 10 years at that church. It's where I, as a young adult, grew up in a young adult community. And then years later, God actually called me to be a part of staff at that church. And I was on staff for about 5 years. And 2 weeks after my wedding, everything just kind of fell apart, and it left me questioning a lot when it came to the local church, because this was a place that I thought I actually would call my forever home, a place that I thought I would just be at and grow my family in. And clearly, God had other plans for my life, and it completely took me by surprise. And so I have shared with you guys just what the journey has looked like from when that happened up until now, and it has been like extremely hard. Right off the bat, me and my husband found a church that was a safe landing spot for us, but it was about 2 hours away from our home. And to be honest, I have just not felt like church. And so we found a church that we were at, but with the commute and a couple of other things that we just realized it just wasn't something that would work long term. So we were grateful for that season that right off the bat, we never stopped going to church up until a couple of months after that. And so we had stopped going to church for what felt like a really long time. I honestly haven't been a part of a church community for a little over a year, and to be honest, I have had zero desire to be a part of a church community or serve or anything. And that was something that early on me and my husband wrestled with as far as conversating, because he was very much ready to serve and get back into things, and I encouraged him to do so, but I was at a place where I was just like, I don't feel ready yet, and a lot of my backstory is I have spent majority of my adult life serving in church at some capacity, whether it had been as a volunteer or on staff, which was most of my adult life is just being on staff at a church. And I have never really just taken the time to just sit with the Lord. And so I talked to my husband and I was like, you know what? I am just going to sit. I have no desire to serve, and I just don't think that's what the Lord wants from me, is because I really just needed a genuine break from the church lifestyle. And over the last year, I have had and heard conversations when it comes to people regarding church hurt. And one of the things that I have to address to people, because and you guys may have heard this before, where people are like, oh my gosh, we need to stop calling it church hurt. When someone hurts you at the gym, you keep going to the gym. And I would hear a part of that conversation so much. But here is the reality of most people who are struggling like myself when it comes to being hurt by people in the local church, is I expect people that live in the world to treat me as people who live in the world. I am not expecting there to be a reverence from God from these people. I am not expecting there to be the same morals that we talk about in scripture when it comes to people, either in a secular workplace or at a gym or at a library, for crying out loud. However, there is a different level of expectation that we have when it comes to church people regarding on how they should be treating other people. And so something that has just widely just opened my eyes is this conversation regarding church hurt, is because I have seen so many Christians like, can we stop calling it that? Like, people hurt you. Yes, people are people at the end of the day. I will even say that even scripture tells us that the church is a place for broken people to come before the Lord and be. But there is, again, a level of expectation that I personally will hold leaders to. It is a different standard than that of people that live in the world. And so that needs to be said when it comes to this conversation, because there are so many people dismissing spiritual abuse from people in the church, spiritual just negligence from the people of God. And that does deserve to be addressed in such a way, even if it's addressed as us saying, hey, we've been hurt by people that we just expected better from. And so, and I'm not talking about like just people in the church. Like, there are people like my friends, for example, we're learning and we're growing. But if you're in a place of leadership, I actually expect better from you. I expected better from myself being in the position that I was in. And so I think that there is so much more to that conversation that deserves to be had. And again, I have just been walking through some of it. I mean, I remember, and I was telling my husband this the other day, of there was a time and season where I quietly and in my mind and in my heart judged people that would tell me that they were not connected to a church. They were the people that would be like, oh yeah, I'm watching church online. Oh, I haven't found a local church, et cetera, et cetera. I used to kind of, in my heart, carry this over righteous judgment on those people because I was in a church at the time, and I'd be like, well, just go to a church. Like, there are plenty of churches. Now, walking through this experience on my own for the last year, I realize how hard it is to find a genuine church in your community that believes the same things that you believe, that walk the walk. Like, it genuinely has been one of the hardest things in my life outside of searching for a godly husband. Like, I am not lying. I had lists of churches. Once I was ready, I had a list of churches that we had to check out, and I went through every single one of their websites, looking at their websites, because, like, let's be honest, like, without saying it, there is certain things that we look for in a church outside of, like, it should always be a Bible believing church. Like, any church that we go to should always believe what the Word of God says and try their best to actually follow those things. But I think there are different criterias for every person. And again, that looks different for a lot of people. So I grew up non-denominational. And so most of my life, I have been in a non-denominational church setting. It wasn't until my last job that I entered into a denomination. And even that denomination, after being there for 5 years, there were things that I questioned as far as the things that they believed in and the things that they preached. I remember being in Bible college at this particular denomination's, Bible college, and I had one theological question that I wrestled with the entire time, and it was because I did not believe what they were preaching, and it was regarding salvation. And so that was just something I wrestled with. So coming into this new season, when I talked with my husband of the things that we laid out on the table, it was one of those things. It was a theological thing of like, are we paying attention to where churches align theologically? And to be honest, a lot of them don't. Like, even when I served at this church, a lot of the people that attended didn't even know that they were under a denomination, and they didn't even understand what that denomination believed at its core. And so I, now knowing this, have taken it into consideration of when we're looking for a church, I don't really want to be attached to a certain denomination, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was also one thing that was pretty non-negotiable for me, which was I need to be at a church that believes in women in ministry. And I'm not talking about, oh, a woman can be your admin, because again, if you don't know my background, whether you disagree or not, totally on you. It's not really my thing, but I do believe that God has called women to be preachers. I have been a youth and young adult pastor, again, most of my adult life. And so I have to be at a church that encourages that or believes in that. And so when I look for churches, I browse for churches that have females on staff. Again, that's just a personal preference. I do understand and recognize that everyone has a little bit, of different theological things and debates or whatever. But for me and my family, that was something that had to be on the table, is because if I decide to ever step back into ministry one day, I don't want to be at a church that quenches the gifts that God has given me. I'm also, we have a daughter, and I want to make sure that she knows and understands in the future that if God is calling her to preach, that she can do that. And so those were just things that, like, believe it or not, were so hard to find in a local church. And so I've been posting about this for a while, of just the fact that we had a season where we just weren't going to church, and I'm talking about like months. And that was really interesting for us, is we started watching a church in New York City online, because they have a pastor who I just love and adore, and it was just great teachings. But there came a time where we were like, okay, we should probably look back into getting into a local church, because there were just some things that we noticed were lacking. Like, we really lacked just community, like being around other believers. Like, we have friends that are believers and they're great and we love them so much, but it's different. And so we had to wrestle with, okay, what does it look like to go back into a church? Where are we going? Like, we really had to be so intentional and prayerful about that, because it was scary. It still is scary. Coming from the things that I endured, it was one of the hardest mental things for me to process, is, okay, we need to find a church to commit to. Not just like, oh, we're going to check this out one week and go here another. Like, we really had to be intentional about finding a church that we could grow at. And honestly, we found a church it's a small commute, 30 minutes ish, which isn't bad, because again, we're everywhere all the time. And so we have been consecutively attending this church for the last a little over a month. And it has been something that I personally have just been like, God, what's going on? I think the thing about working in a church for a long time, where you're seeing the good, the bad, the ugly, like everything in between, is I now find red flags so much quicker than I would have previously at another church. And so that's something that can be a strength and also a weakness, because I want to be open to understanding that every church has its thing, but there were just certain things that were non-negotiable for me. And so we found a church that so far we feel comfortable in. We have noticed a great response in the community. Like, it so far has been great, but I think I am the one that's on my tippy toes of like, okay, well, what's going to happen next? There's sure to be something. And so God has really been having to deal with me on my heart of like, not thinking I know it all. Just because I've worked in a church, served in a church, like, does not mean all churches are the same. I do not believe that all churches are bad. I do not believe that all churches are the same, et cetera, et cetera. I believe that there are some incredible churches doing incredible work for the Lord, and all of us should be so honored to be a part of that. But it does come with having to do your research and look it up. And so it has been a slow roll for me personally. Like, the first week there, me and my husband debriefed, and we kind of like laid out, okay, how do we feel after attending this church? Like, are you going to start serving? Like, what are you looking into? And immediately I was just like, yeah, I still don't plan on serving. Like, I have not served in a church for a year. And some people might be like, oh my gosh, you should be serving. Da-da-da. I get you. I hear you. God has called us to serve, but I think serving looks different for everyone. Sometimes serving does look like in your local church. And for a lot of people, sometimes serving looks like in your community, in the things, like the places that God has already placed you. I do not believe that serving only has to take place in a church. Do I want to eventually serve in church? Yes. But considering what I have walked through, I am very slow to want to serve, because I know the moment I serve, the moment I jump all in, is the moment that my heart will probably start to be triggered of things that happened at the previous church I was at, which is where I was all in relationships. I'm talking, I gave every person all that I could, and I had thought and hoped that that was a God-honoring thing for me to do, and I thought it would work out in my favor, and it just didn't. And so some of those relationships that I had previously have genuinely scarred me in some ways, and I can hold the grief that I still carry from this church and hope for this new church in the same hand, because I know that God is good. I know that God is for me. I know what God wants for me. And so while I'm still grieving, because I'm going to be honest, I'm not over everything that's happened. There are things that it has just come in waves, where there are some days where I'm great and there are some days where I'm crying and I'm like, man, like, I probably will never have that again. I probably will never feel comfortable sharing my vulnerabilities with people again. I probably will never feel safe serving again. Like, it comes in waves. And I think that something that I'm learning with the Lord is that it's okay. It's okay to not rush the healing portion that comes with grieving a church that you once called home. And so it has been scary stepping back into a new church, but while I am still afraid, I also recognize that God has not given me the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And so that is something I have to carry with me day in and day out, as God is still unraveling some of these things in my heart. And so I have shared that over the last couple of weeks, and I surprisingly have been getting a couple of DMs and questions, which is why I kind of wanted to unpack this just a little bit further, and messages of people who are in similar seasons. And I would say to that person who is still sitting in the space where I was a couple of months ago, which is, I don't want to attend church. I don't want to talk to people. I just want it to be me and God. I've been there, and I think that there are definitely seasons for that, but I believe that they are just that, seasons. I do not believe God has called us to be online church lookers forever, unless there are a few exceptions that I would make in that conversation, which is maybe like my grandma, for example, is disabled, like to the point where she does not leave the house. She can't. It's really hard for her. And so, like, she is the type of person that, she watches her church service online sometimes, and she still regularly calls and talks to that church community. Like, that is this exception of someone I would say can be an online attender. But if you are God willing and able, if God has allowed you to still to be able to travel to the grocery store and go hang out with your friends, there is nothing stopping you from being a part of a church community. Now, I will say, it has been a year for me. It has taken me a year to find a place where we feel somewhat safe and like we could be here. And so, to the person that has been sitting at home for maybe the last couple of months, last even year or two, I would encourage you to do your research. There are a lot of churches that could do better, but there are also a lot of great churches that you would probably love. And so I would say, do your research into these churches and places. And something that me and my husband have done as we have searched for a church is, we don't just go one week and be like, yeah, this isn't going to work or that's going to work. Like, it's actually very rare that we do that. Something that we have done as we have searched over the last year for a church is give a church time. And so we commit to going to said church for minimum 1 month, 1 to 3 months in total, before we decide this is where we're going to land. Because every church has its seasons. As someone who works in a church, I know that during Easter season, every church is going to be cleaned. Every church is going to put on their A game. Why? Because Easter is a time where everyone goes to church, even if it's just once. However, it's those moments in between the Easter and the Christmas, like that I personally have learned to look for. And so I look for the in between in that. And so you can't get that from going one time or even twice. And so that has been something that we have been doing in our regular search for a church, is give it time. Give it time to get to know the church. Give it time to get to know people in the church, or just see what the vibe is. And so, not the vibe. That's a weird thing, but just to get a feel of the church and so forth. And so that would be something that I would encourage anyone to do. The next thing I want to address as a part of this conversation is what it took to physically get back into a church. I am someone who has in the past dealt with a lot of anxiety. I've been to therapy, and I believe in therapy and Jesus, and it's great. And so I, right off the bat, when it came to not being a part of the church that I was previously at, I would experience immense anxiety attacks when we started going to our safe church that again was the church that we landed at right after. And I just would become like paralyzed. Like it would be worship and I would just feel like my heart just like going and it's racing. And I had friends at this church. I have deep love and respect for this church. And I remember like I was friends with the pastor, and anytime she would talk to me, I would just feel like an immense weight on me because I didn't know what expectations they carried towards me, knowing my story and knowing me, and also vice versa, the expectation I had on this church, which I actually came to realize I did have expectations that were unrealistic, especially being in the season that I am. But I just would have like I would just cry like during worship for no reason. It wasn't that anyone said anything to me or did anything to me. I just realized I carried this immense anxiety because I had this fear of getting to know someone and getting back into serving. It was bad. It was bad. Thank God for the therapist that helped me walk through that season, but it was really hard for me. And I realized a lot of that came from, again, the situation that I was in, and just there was just so much fear wrapped around that conversation. And so when it came to like taking a couple of weeks to sit with the Lord and just process some things, it wasn't that I prayed and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to go back to church. Like it literally, like that did not happen because I, unlike my husband, was like, yeah, I'm good staying home. Like I was the one that was like, I can figure something out. I'll watch the sermon online. I'll did it. Like I was definitely the one, and he was always the one pushing. But it wasn't like I just prayed and woke up one day and was like, yeah, I'm ready to get back to church. That didn't happen. In a blessing in disguise, I was having a conversation with a couple friend of ours that literally pours into our life so much, me and my husband. And I remember there was this season like where me and my husband would just like, I was just so irritated at him all the time. Like, and I think it's because like there was a season where he worked from home and then I would go to work and come home and he was here all day and like dishes wouldn't be done. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like it was just, it's normal husband wife stuff. It's normal like family stuff. But there was this season where like he was just so irritating to me, and we would argue about like the littlest things a lot. And he will say that it was I that argued and not him, and he's totally right. He is not a really an arguer, but there were just things that would just like get to me. And I remember sitting down with our friends, and he wasn't with me, which I was like a relief. I was like, oh my gosh, I can talk to them by myself. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not kidding. But I had a conversation with them, and I shared some things that were like hard. Like I was like, here's what we're wrestling with. And like this couple has been a part of my husband's life since he was like 19 or something. Like he was a youngin. So they have full range to speak life into us. And we're also very honest and open with them about our struggles because we believe in transparency, especially when it comes to people that are pouring into our lives. And so I kind of had just told them some of the areas of which we were struggling and what I felt. And, here's what my husband has been saying to me, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll never forget, she was just like, my Unique, I know it's been hard for you guys, but you really need to be in a church because being around other people and a community would really help you guys. And she said it to me so many times before. Like I said, they have walked with us through this thing we call life. And so they knew about my previous church experience. They have known about every church experience we have had since then. Like we are completely open with them. And when she said it that time, it just hit me different. And I was like, man, it really has been a while since we have been a part of a church community. And we got to the point where we honestly stopped looking. But there was something about the way that she said it this time that I went home and I went back to the drawing board and I was like, okay, so we're going to start visiting churches again and we've got to find what works. And I think that was something that changed how I started viewing where we were at in our relationship with the church. And to be honest, like we had gotten pretty comfortable just living the way that we were living. And so after that, I was just like, no, we're doing it wrong. Like God has called us to be good stewards of the things that he has given us and the family that we have. And I just was like, we're not doing that. And so a way for us to do that, partial, there are so many other parts of that conversation, but a way for us to do that is to actually be a part of the church community. It's what the Bible talks about in Hebrews, right? It says, do not forsake the gathering of believers. And so I said, man, we have spent so much time just trying to pretend it's not affecting us, but it is. Both me and my husband grew up in, well, not grew up. I grew up in the church. I also hold very tightly to church community. He started when he was in his teens and has been a part of a church since then. And then there was a short season where when we were engaged and when we met and when we were dating, that we were literally serving together. And so to just completely walk away from all of that, it was a little bit unrealistic. And so we had to address the elephant in the room. And so I felt like I was just personally not stewarding this life that God has given me well. And so I was like, as someone who has been so gifted to do the things that she does, I know I need to be a part of the local church. I've spent the last 5 years telling young adults in our young adult ministry, like, you need to be planted at a local church. You need to get connected to the body. And I felt hypocritical because in my own hard season, I had disregarded all that I had preached for literal years. And I'm not even just talking about the 5 years that I was a young adults pastor. Going back a couple more years when I was doing youth ministry, again, that has been the core of my message. Even my husband, when he met me, he was like, you have always preached to be so for the local church. So it's just surprising that now that you're in this season where you're not on staff at a church, that you're like, forget the local church. And so I had to really wrestle with that conviction on my own, because like I said, I was the one that was a little bit hesitant towards those things, and God really had to check me. And again, it takes time. It's not something that was just like right off the bat, but there was just such a conviction that I carried in my heart of, I was the person that people looked to as a pastor, and I would tell them these things from the bottom of my heart. And when it came to me, I didn't believe the things that I preached. And so I had to correct myself. I had to fix myself. I had to like put my big girl panties on and be like, you know what, God, I am walking through a hard season, but there is nothing that is too hard for God. There is nothing that God cannot heal. There is nothing that God cannot move in. He is God and God Almighty. Therefore, he is completely able. And so that was something that I just had to, again, kind of address in my heart and know, like, I need to make this right before I get too far into it. Right now, I am at a place where I am learning to separate people that call themselves Christians or the people of God and God's church, his bride, in a whole. And the reason I say that is because I, at my previous church, had so many leaders that I thought loved me and that I thought were incredible. And at the end of the day, they are just as broken as me, but I just had more grace for the brokenness than they did, I believe. And so walking through a season where I have been just really let down by a lot of people, it has really caused me to look at my relationship with the church. Because again, I have been a person that has preached the local church, and I still believe that. I'm not saying I don't. I do believe that all of us should be planted somewhere. I do believe that as someone who has a platform, like, I need to be under leadership and authority of a shepherd. Like, those are still things that I very much believe, but it does look different for me because I am learning to separate people, including pastoral leadership, from the church in a whole. And it has been taking a lot from me, and I'm at a very like low bottom line season of this all. I think that when I do get a little bit more connected into the church that we're visiting, that it could look different, but there's a lot of broken trust between me and leadership in the church. And that's the part where I'm having to pray through and sit with the Lord, because again, God is reminding me that just as much as I am human and was in a place of leadership, although I laid my brokenness very differently than other people that I served alongside with, that there's still grace there, and there's still healing that needs to be done, and there's still trust that has to be rebuilt in my life. And I think that rebuilding of trust doesn't actually even come from people. It has to come from God. And because again, there's this expectation that exists that the only person that deserves to be on that level of expectation is actually God himself. And so it's just this constant reminding myself of other people's brokenness, especially those in leadership. And I have been the type of person that, like, I have hoped that I have led well over the last 10 plus years of my life when it comes to being on staff at a church. I hope that when people walk away from me, or when I was serving, that they really seen a person that tried her best to honor God and honor what God had laid before me as far as my responsibilities and et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm just learning that, like, everyone's leadership is so different. The way that I led was different than the way that others alongside me led. And I realized how different that was. And I was blessed to be able to have done what I did for so long, but it's a new season. And I think that God is just kind of softening my heart again for those things. And so I think my relationship looks different. I see the church different again now. I used to be like super hopeful of all things churches, but now that I see how much damage it does to people, especially people's spiritual well-being and mental well-being, I'm very sensitive to that. And now having had walked through that on my own, it's something that I see even more so. And so I believe that God is still doing a work in my heart when it comes to that, and I'm allowing him to show me both sides of that conversation, but it looks very different now. So the last thing I will say as I wrap up where I am when it comes to the church is that just because you leave a broken system or a broken church does not mean that you are leaving God. There are so many people that, like, were worried that what happened would have caused me to walk away from God. And while that is a lot of people's stories, and I completely understand, that's not my story. I think that it's okay to take a step back and reevaluate what it is your values are, what your beliefs are, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't take a year off of the church and be like, yeah, I'm just like, who cares what God says? I'm not going to live by him. Like, that was not me at all. I literally had so many people that were rightfully so just worried about me, but that was never my heart. I knew I needed to take a step back because I just needed to focus on me and God. Like, I needed to focus on my own relationship with him and not be crowded out by the demands of serving in a church and trying to present myself as okay. I think that was my biggest struggle after being hurt by the church that I was at, was that I felt this need to prove myself, like, oh my gosh, I don't need them. I'll just go to a new church and use my gifts and da da da. And that was my mindset early on. And God really had to humble me and slow me down and be like, Mayunique, you're not at a place where you can do that right now. And I really wasn't. Like, I had so much hurt that I have been unpacking, and like, I've unpacked and still am unpacking over the course of the last year. And I'm just now at a place where I can say I've prayed for the people that have hurt me maybe once or twice. I'm not fully there yet. They're not a part of my regular prayer rhythm, but I have particularly been burdened with one person that I think I carry the most hurt in my heart. And I finally got to a place where, like, the other day I was like, I really just want to pray for her. Like, because as much as I hate her, I also love her. You know what I mean? And I don't really hate her, but I'm just saying. And so I'm like still walking that out. And I think that as I have been attending this new church, like, all of these things are okay. I think there's just pressure that we get put into, whether it be from family, social media, etc. So, like, there's this pressure to have it all together, and it has to look pretty, and it has to do all of these things. And I just think God has been teaching me that that's actually not it. Like, the most important thing that matters is that I am still walking with the Lord. And there are going to be some seasons where the things that I'm wrestling with are more, and they're heavier and they're harder. And there are going to be seasons where, like, right now I'm starting to feel that lift again. And I say that because, like, being back in a church setting, again, we're not involved whatsoever, but being back in a church setting actually feels good. It feels good to worship again. It feels good to be excited about a Sunday again. It feels good to know that, like, I'm learning something about the Lord that I didn't know before through these pastors and people that are at this church. And so it's good to see people smile at me when I go to church instead of making me feel like I'm so burdensome because I've caused all these issues and that was never the case. But like, I'm just giving you an example. And so I am just so thankful to serve a God who doesn't give up when we do. I had given up going to church and being a part of the church and all these things. And God was like, it's okay that you don't want to do that right now. It's okay that you don't want to talk about that. It's okay that you don't want to touch that. But in time, we are going to have to. And so I'm so thankful that God has given me the grace to walk me through this season where I'm taking it day by day, step by step, instead of everything all at once and becoming overburdened and struggled with it. And so, yeah, so that's what's been going on. Again, I kind of just wanted to talk about it because there are so many of you who have been wrestling with your own church hurt and your own stories, etc., etc. And I just want to say that no matter how many times you scroll and someone's like, stop calling it church hurt. No, you can call it church hurt all you want. If that's what you are dealing with, that is what you're dealing with. And I just want to invite you, like I said, like to just bring it to the Lord. I'm not telling you to jump back into church this Sunday. If that's what God tells you to do, so be it. I'm excited for you. But what I am also saying, like, it's okay to still be figuring this out. It's okay if, like me, you need to make a pro and con list about every church that you're potentially visiting. It's okay that, like me, you're like, hey, I want to give this a couple of weeks to see how I feel. And maybe after week 4, you're like, this probably isn't the place for me. It's okay. Keep praying, keep inviting God into that conversation. And I promise you, He will show up time and time again. There is still so much that I can unpack from what God has been teaching us as a family over these last couple of months. And even me, myself, carrying all that I have been carrying. And through it all, like I said, the grief that I'm carrying and the hope that I have been able to coexist in such a beautiful way that literally only God can do. And if He can do it for me, I am more than positive He will do it for you. But you've got to keep giving it to Him. You've got to keep bringing it to Him, and you've got to trust Him. And that's not always easy. It's really hard, but so well worth it. So, yeah. Thanks for joining me for this episode. I hope that if you are in a season where you are walking through, hurt of your own, that you are encouraged. So believe it or not, my camera actually just died. So that is my cue to end this. I hope that this has been insightful. If you know someone walking through their own church hurt or whatever they're at, I encourage you to send them this podcast. If you want to share your story with me, please know that my DMs are always open as someone who is a listening ear and understands the situation. And if you need someone to talk to, again, my DMs are always open. I love you guys. I will see you next time. Bye.